Well, hello there, and welcome to day 67 of A Film a Day, with me, Jordan Woodley. Today, looking at the 2014 dystopian sci-fi thriller Snowpiercer. The reason I came to this, I suppose, is that you'll notice through this week's films that they are films that I either have an inkling that I'll enjoy or know that I'll enjoy, because, as I mentioned yesterday, my concern about doing this process is that I'm concerned that by watching a film every single day that's new and I need to have fresh takes, that I don't know. I'm concerned that I'm losing the ability to analyze critically and enjoy a film, and so I'm sort of listing out films, most of which I haven't seen, with the exception of The Incredible Hulk, which I had seen once, but films that I suspect I will get something out of and see whether I still enjoy the experience. And so I thought I'd start by looking at, because again, the point of this channel is still analytical, not just reviewing. So if I'm going to choose a film, I want to do it with a sense of purpose. And so by choosing to start the week with Snowpiercer, it serves two masters, really. On the one hand, I get to watch a cool, interesting sci-fi that's exploring interesting ideas. But on the other hand, I also get to look at a filmmaker who is currently being hailed in the conversation, as it were, of modern filmmaking, of course having won Best Picture and Best Director for his film Parasite. It's funny, really. You can draw a lot of parallels between this and Parasite. People would obviously think more to draw parallels between this and his later film Train to Busan, because it's set on a train and it's about an apocalyptic type event, so you think, oh well, those parallels are obvious. But I think the great thing about this is the fact that this and Parasite really demonstrate Bong Joon-ho's ability to tell story and the kinds of stories that he wants to explore, and his growing authorship in terms of the themes and ideas and the style that he has are consistent to such a degree that you know when you're watching a Bong Joon-ho film. There's a certain tonal consistency that he's striking as much as someone like Christopher Nolan, when you know you're watching a Christopher Nolan film. It's interesting because at the time when this came out, I saw it come out. I saw the discussion on it. I saw that Chris Evans was the lead, and I just dismissed it. I remember thinking I just wasn't in the mood for this, and I kind of thought I would forget it, and that this is just going to be something that just passed me by, and I wouldn't really hear much about. Where I really stand quite corrected. Snowpiercer, it's not a revolutionary dystopian sci-fi film, but it's one that people talk about quite regularly. I mean, obviously because of the increasing reputation of the director, but and this being his first English language film, but I now realise why I dismissed it and why I shouldn't have, which is this really came in the heart of that post-apocalypse, well, not post-apocalypse, but this dystopian sci-fi future narrative period that we were going through, particularly with YA. So the obvious examples being The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, the Divergent series, the host, not the Bong Joon-ho host, the other one, the one with the aliens, and it goes on, and we were going through a real slog of dystopian narratives that really, after a while, wear you down. But what I didn't factor in is that Snowpiercer is a very different kind of narrative to those others. In terms of, there is something very specific trying to be said here. And don't get me wrong, something like Maze Runner or Hunger Games are trying to say something, but this has a very pinpoint focus statement about society and class and the human capacity for societal destruction. And this film is much better than those. I mean, I actually really liked The Hunger Games, but I think this film, to some degree, because it's just a one-off film, it's not part of a series, it's not trying to recapture, say, the Harry Potter thing that those films were trying to at the time. It is trying to tell a very concise, clear story. It just feels a better watch, where I think The Hunger Games really lost track of what kind of story it was trying to tell, and across 4 films, really, the tone and style got very inconsistent, and so the ending is the final film is just not, it's muddled and not particularly good. And don't get me wrong, I don't think Snowpiercer is a masterpiece, and I don't think this is anywhere near the pinnacle of Bong Joon-ho's ability. But I think it's a demonstration of what he's capable of. This film isn't perfect. It's got a lot of flaws in it, and it is one of those ones that as soon as you step away, you start to really pick apart the narrative. So, before I jump into the plot, I suppose, I am going to do a spoiler section at the end, because I do want to talk about this film in relation to its source material, which is the French graphic novel, and the differences in the ending, and what Bong Joon-ho's trying to say, and what I think the real difference in how that ending plays out. But I'll get to that. So, this film follows Chris Evans trying to make it, who is at the back of a train in a post-apocalypse frozen wasteland, and at the back of the train are the poorest, most underclass people, but of course they don't want to be oppressed this way. By the front of the train, which of course has the first class, the wealthy, and at the very front of the train you have Ed Harris, who plays the man who invented the train and runs it. And so, on a basic level, it's just a case of Chris Evans and his team of people travelling through the train to get to the front. And it's action, and it's sci-fi, and it's good for what it is. I think there's a real interesting style to it. I mean, the fact that it's so claustrophobic and so contained, and there's something really quite stifling about being in this, especially in the first act, where you're in this awful, hundreds of people all crammed inside these carriages, and there's something really quite choking about it. And I think that's quite a cool thing to do. It's quite a you genuinely feel that sense of claustrophobia. I mentioned this back with the Mike Lee when I discussed Vera Drake, that sense of exploring class through claustrophobia, that somehow you create these intimate spaces that are both intimate but also just that little bit choking. And I think this takes that to the nth degree, where these aren't working class people, these are underclass, and they are being squashed into a box practically to essentially die. And I think that's a really striking opening section. And then what it does is, as you go through with Chris Evans, you have these weird, almost satirical, surrealist. I got a real sense of almost League of Gentlemen about it. There's something, there's something black comedic about it, that it's supposed to be darkly funny, and yet there's something almost warped, like the Grand Guignol theatre practice, particularly with Tilda Swinton, who plays this. She's sort of she's the leader of an enforcement group who essentially, as far as we can tell, runs the train on a daily basis, sort of under the tutelage of Ed Harris, who gives her instructions from a distance, and she primarily focuses on the working class section and the underclass section, and keeps the status quo in play. And she plays this very strange performance, and I think Tilda Swinton is genuinely a phenomenal actor. She brings something new and different to every performance that she does. But this one's odd because the character she plays is almost cartoonish. There's something really almost out of place in this film where everyone else is playing more of a traditional sci-fi dystopian drama, whereas she's almost in something, I don't know, like I say, something more League of Gentlemen, where it's just a little bit over the top. But I think there's a function in that. I think that there is something trying to be said there about the fact that she's this almost like Dolores Umbridge style character who's buffoonish and ridiculous, but also dangerous and a monster at the core of it. I just don't know if it works. I didn't feel like it came together, and it's very much one of the standouts of oddness in this film. And so you go through sequences like the one that really caught my eye is I've never seen such a beautifully choreographed and photographed axe fight scene, which is very brutal and quite horrific, you know, and you have all these men wielding axes, killing people en masse, and yet there's a certain section of this fight scene that's very mesmerizing, and that's quite unusual. I must say, it was quite a thing to see and watch this whole odd sequence. Although it is through the perspective of a man who's on a drug, and drugs are a very important plot point in the film. That one of the characters and his daughter are both on these like hard drugs, and it's also suggested that many people on the train are on these hard drugs that cause like hallucinations and time slow experience, and have a very heroin kind of sort of thing going on, but through the perspective of someone experiencing that as they're watching an axe fight scene. Like I say, it's strangely mesmerizing and beautifully choreographed. And then you just have weird things like even in the confines of the train, you have things like an aquarium section, and the visuals of that are quite on, and a herbology area, and that's the fact that it's practically almost like a wood inside a train is quite. It's an interesting way to represent space, and the fact that this is all in one location through this train, and yet you can represent it in numerous different ways. Mentioning the axe aspect of it, it is quite this film, and I think this is also why it stood out to me against those other dystopian YA ones, is the fact that this is not a YA film. This has, like I say, drugs and brutal violence and quite dark themes, and there are subplots in it or backstories that go to truly dark places that you think, oh, good lord. And I think, and that again makes it stand out, and I think that gives it a certain level of authority, because it tries to represent the brutality of the confines of this environment and how horrifying this experience is for everyone, from bottom to top, from the back of the train to first class. That even the most luxurious people are still prisoners inside this train are going through something quite horrifying, but just a different variation of it. And like, as I say, I think this is littered with commentary. The parallels between this and Parasites, which we're talking about class and confine, and the idea that we're all prisoners within inside a system. I think that's... This Snowpiercer was an opportunity for Bong Joon-ho to sort of stretch his legs in that and start to talk about these themes. I mean, the film does have that problem where it's very hard to walk the line between telling this sci-fi story, trying to give a like realistic satire, but then also saying, well, the mechanics of this don't quite work. And when you think about population control, when you think about how this system works, or how punishments are laid out, or how food's distributed, or the mechanics of it or how the train itself functions, even. The mechanics of it you do have to stretch your imagination, and I think that's where it will win or lose people, is whether, because it doesn't make complete sense. You do have to take it with a pinch of salt and go, oh, I just have to accept that this is just the way it is, because otherwise the whole narrative is like a house of cards, and once you pick up one, the whole thing just falls in on itself, and you think, well, this doesn't make sense, and this doesn't really, how would this work? But if you can, I think, as I say, this is a warped film contained with quite a brutal realist style, with a satire and a dark comedy sense, trying to talk about society and trying to talk about wealth and status and power dynamics, and how systems are supposed to work, and yet we're prisoners. And possibly the whole theme about what's the saying? People fighting over cutlery whilst the house burns around them. And so I do think this is a very interesting film. I don't think it entirely works, but I think it's interesting, and I think it's one that you'll go away thinking about, even if it like I say, it doesn't entirely make sense. And I left in having enjoyed the experience of watching it. Not to mention that it has one of John Hurt's last performances, and again, I think John Hurt is, and it's not particularly groundbreaking information, but I think he's one of the greatest British actors, and any chance to see him perform is just wonderful. And so yeah, I'm now going to step into the spoiler section, because I do want to talk more about the broader themes of it, and very much the ending. So from this point on, spoilers. So one of the biggest problems with this is the ending of the film, where we get to Ed Harris's character, and he says to Chris Evans that this was all a plan between him and John Hurt, who've been working together since presumably the train first started, to keep everything running, the system, as it were, running. There needs to be population control, but there needs to be a certain amount of population. But then Ed Harris is old and John Hurt is old, and they're going to essentially, Chris Evans is going to take over. And unfortunately, this is where I think the Hollywoodification of it really struggles, because Ed Harris, instead of coming across as an interesting sort of nuanced character, he comes across as villainous sociopath who's like, oh well, people have to die, they have to be killed en masse, we have to control population, this is how the system works. And Ed Harris plays it quite apathetically villainous. That sense of, I don't know, the amorality where it's he cares about the system and he cares about keeping the system in place. It reminds me a little bit of In Time, when the villain isn't who you think it is, which is the gangster. It turns out to be the cop who's keeping the system in place. And And that's all, of course, villainous. And Chris Evans, realising this, doesn't want to be the heir to this and destroys it, killing himself, killing everyone on the train besides one teenage girl and a 5-year-old boy. And they go out into the cold to start anew, where at the very end they see a polar bear, which means that the chemical that started this, the CW7, though it froze the world and was believed to have killed all life on Earth, perhaps hasn't, and maybe there's hope for life. And I think maybe that's the thing for Bong Joon-ho, that he wants to explore the darker sides of society and the nihilism and the bleakness, but I think he wants to give the tiniest sliver of hope, even though there is still almost none. Because this is not the ending from the graphic novel. That I want to credit the fact that I know about the difference between this and the graphic novel because of another YouTube channel, which I think I've mentioned before, called Cinefix, who do a series called What's the Difference, where they examine a film and its source material and where the two diverge. And so I'll put the link in the description below, because I do think that's if you want a breakdown of all the differences between the graphic novel and the film, it's a really good video. But the endings, so there's a subplot in the graphic novel about how the back end section have developed a disease, not intentionally, but a disease has culminated amongst them, and that they're travelling through the train, and that the front section are aware of this disease, and they are trying to stop it. And so what ends up happening is they uncouple the back end of the train, of course leaving those passengers to die. However, it simultaneously transpires that amongst the people in the back end, they've developed like a herd immunity, or some of them are simply carriers but not sufferers of this disease. And of course, having travelled through, the ones who have survived, who have travelled through the train, have inadvertently infected the first-class passengers, who are all going to die of this disease. Ed Harris's character, the creator of the train, where Chris Evans' character gets to him, he's not this big, oh, the order must be kept in line and all this villain. He is very much more interested in he only cares about the engine. The engine is all he is. It's him and the engine, and he's isolated himself from the rest of the train because all he cares about is the engine, and he wants Chris Evans to take over. And I don't think there's the plot with John Hurt that it's all a Machiavellian scheme. I think it's just Chris Evans having arrived, he wants him to take over. And in this version, Chris Evans does. And what happens is all the front end, the first class passengers die of this disease eventually. The back end passengers have been uncoupled and die. And Chris Evans, and then the conductor, the train, the guy at the front dies, and Chris Evans' character is left to tend to the engine. And it's very French and bleak, and has that real nihilist sense of, oh, everything's pointless, life is meaningless. And I think Bong Joon-ho doesn't seemingly like that absolute bleakness. He wants that sense of hope. He wants something, even if it's the most minimal something, even if it's a light flashing in a basement. He wants something to indicate that hope is there, even if it's futile. But I don't think it works for this. I feel like giving us that sort of Adam and Eve, oh, the two children survive ending. I just felt it was very flat. It was a very sort of, okay, because it, like I said, it requires Ed Harris's character to be more villainous than he was originally portrayed or written as. And it requires that the two children who survive, of course, with the very Adam and Eve kind of style to it, go off and maybe restart humanity, or maybe find survivors. With the polar bear being alive, maybe there are other survivors. But I don't know, I just didn't... It didn't really work for me. I don't know, I just left thinking, well, it's fine. But it's though the bleak ending from the comic book might have been too dark, perhaps, I would have been liked that real sense of, oh, wow, this is really nihilist and quite defeatist. I think that would have had more to sort of say, and I don't really know if you're going to make this satire about society, unless you're saying destroy society and rebuild from the ashes. I don't really know how that satire completes the circle. But other than that, like I say, the ending, an ending does not always make a film, and I think in spite of that, there are interesting things within the narrative, and I love the style, and I love the visuals and the cinematography, and as I say, both the claustrophobia inside the train, but also the beautiful and yet bleak landscape outside the train. Again, Bong Joon-ho, this was him stretching his legs as he's gone on to become this film great, appreciated filmmaker. So I do think it's worth going back to and reflecting on. I'm interested to watch the Netflix series to see how that differs and where that goes, and I'm not entirely sure how a series could fill out this whole idea, but I'm intrigued to see what that looks like. But yeah, interesting film. Thanks for joining me. If you could like this video, if you enjoyed it, if you could go back and watch some of my older videos, there are now 66 of them, not including the bonuses, and share the video on social media. You can follow me on social media and Twitter at Jordan_Woodley. Also, please subscribe so that when new videos come up, you'll get notifications of them. Thanks again for joining me. Take care.